Hello everybody and welcome to this Aztec, the Azure Technology channel video. My name is Neil Millington and I'm going to be talking around Azure Data Factory. This is actually a series of videos around the subject of Azure Data Factory. So this one in particular is going to be, we're going to build a very basic pipeline around SQL Server aimed at level 2-300 there. As you can see, what does that mean? These are the Microsoft standard descriptions of the leveling. So level 2-300 there, basically level 100 is effectively PowerPoint. So level 2-300 is we're going to be doing some bit of coding, so we need some understanding of the actual technologies, the services we're going to be using. However, we're not down at the expert level, which is level 400. In that context, what are our prerequisites for what we're going to be talking about? So, need you to have an understanding of database principles and objects. What does that mean? SQL Server table. Need you to understand what that is. I need you to understand SQL Server store procedure and SQL, which is the language we use inside SQL Server and many other relational data stores. I need you to have a familiarity with the select and insert syntax. And in terms of the tools we're going to be using, clearly if you want to have a go of this yourself, clearly you're going to need an Azure subscription. That's basically what you use to materialize your Azure services into. And the services we are going to be using are obviously Data Factory, the nature of this video, and SQL Server, in this case, and Azure SQL DB. So before we get going, what actually is an Azure Data Factory pipeline? Simplistically, it's a data-driven workflow. If you're familiar with SQL Server Integration Services, SIS, you'll be, and then obviously there's equivalent products out there as well. I'm talking the Microsoft SIS product in particular here. You'll be familiar with the idea of what a data flow is. So it's basically picking data up from your source, which is what connect and collect refers to in this 4-stage graphic you can see on the screen right now. Picking up your data from the source and then moving it through to your target, which is what the publish refers to here. And then during that process, somehow curating or orchestrating your data while it is being moved by the pipeline. That's what the transform and enriched refers to, as you can see here. And then the final step is the monitoring. So when a pipeline is running, how long did it take to run? Did it complete successfully? Did it complete with an error? If it did have an error, what is it? What do we need to do to remediate that error? So a quick narrative here. Connect and collect is basically picking up the data for it to then be transformed and enriched. The nice thing about pipeline is you can mix and match the Azure services within a pipeline as you need. That could be Databricks or HD Insight, SQL Server, Warehouse, and then other products that are all available on the Azure data platform. And then the publish is, again, you can publish the data into also similar data stores or a data lake or file formats, depending whatever it is, whatever the actions that you need your pipeline to perform are. And then finally down at the bottom there, you can basically you can monitor it. So our monitoring exercise here, we're going to be using the portal, so it's all graphical, nice and visual. But as we say here, you can clearly use other ways of getting through to that PowerShell. There's an API interface, log analytics, a native service to SQL Server itself. So in terms of an actual Azure Data Factory pipeline, there's a few basic concepts, and these are the same concepts through the associated videos to this one here. So the first one is the actual pipeline itself. So as I've talked about, you can have one or many pipelines inside a data factory, and your pipelines, you can actually nest them. So a pipeline can call another pipeline, if that makes sense. What is a pipeline though? It's basically it's a grouping of activities. So an activity, if you're familiar with SQL Server or if you're familiar with SIS. So in SIS, that would be an activity task. And within SQL Server, SQL Agent, that would be a job step. So a SQL Agent task can have a number of job steps to it. And then what you also have is a number of activities. What is an activity? It's an actual processing step. So for example, an activity could be, in the case we're going to do here, is run a store procedure, and it could be something similar depending, as I said earlier, depending on whatever your pipeline is going to be doing. There are three main types of activities. One is a data movement activity. So basically connect to a data source, and then somehow curate that through to a target data source. Then you've got your transformation. So while your data is being moved from the source through to the target, while your data is in motion in flight, perform some transformations on top of that. And that could be, for example, cleansing data, adding values to it, or performing other activities based on those data values. And then we have the control activities. So an activity has a number of outputs. So for example, if the activity completes on success, then perform either complete your pipeline or perform another activity Y. If your activity completes with an error, then again end the pipeline or perform another activity Z, for example. So there's a basic control of flow inside your pipeline also. Two other concepts then we have are the dataset. So what is a dataset? That's actually your data structure within your data source. What does that mean? So in this case, that could be a SQL Server table. And so the rows of data residing inside a SQL Server table. Similarly, it could be your CSV tab, JSON or XML, whether if you've got some sort of file-based data. And then in association with the dataset, we have a link service. A link service simplistically is actually your connection string that allows you to populate your dataset. Again, in context of this video, that's actually a connection through to the Azure SQL Server database. So moving ahead, as I said, we're going to build a very, very basic pipeline. So what we're going to have is our Data Factory pipeline, and we're going to call a SQL Server store procedure. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to jump into SQL Server itself and talk you through the SQL and the store procedure. Again, it's a very simplistic little exercise we've got here. So you could have a number of store procedures where one store procedure runs, and then based on success, it then calls another store procedure. So all I'm showing you here is an individual store procedure, just for you to get familiar with the concepts and practices. So what we've got is we have an Azure SQL database, which is SQL Relay, SQL DB. Inside that database, I've got two tables. Show the tables here. I've got two tables that we're going to be using. One is sum values, which is our target table. And the other one is this table here, EAP reporting, and that's where our source data is going to reside. So what I do is I'm going to use the select command to show you the contents of that EAP reporting table, which are down here. So it's got 4 rows in it. And what we want to do as a little exercise is we want to sum the column over here, quote value. We want to sum the quote values for a particular country. So again, it's only a basic set of data. I've got one country in here. The country code is GBR. So as a standard code, that represents Great Britain. FRA is France, for example, and then clearly we've got USA as well. So in this case, we want to sum these quote values for a given country code. Now, we can actually write the bit of SQL there. Again, it's hard-coded for terms of this demonstration. So I want to select hard-coded string value there, GBR. I want to sum, which is basically total, the quote value column, which is what we have down here, from this table, which is where our base table, which is where this data set is residing, where the geo country code, which is this column, equals GBR. So what if I do? If I actually run that, it'll run that SQL, go into the table, sum those 4 rows, and that's our total value. Now that's great, but obviously each time we do this, we don't have to go into SQL Server, write a bit of SQL. Every time we want the sum values for quotes for GBR, and similarly, if the country code changes, we don't want to have to basically recode it with a different set of values there. So what we can do is we turn this bit of SQL into something called a stored procedure. And again, similar thing. So I'm basically going to parameterize this store procedure. So instead of having to type GBR, we're basically just going to pass it a string value. So each time the bit of code runs, we pass it the country code rather than having to update the country code in 1 or 2 or more places. So what we've got is we're going to create a store procedure. That's just a generic name. I've given it no reason for it. It's just what the store procedure is called. And this is where the parameter is. So the parameter is called country code, and it's notated by that @ symbol there. It's character 10. So basically, we're going to have a store procedure with that name, and basically we're going to pass it up to 10 characters that represents the country code. And what it means in terms of the SQL, if you notice down here, here's the actual SQL that will run inside the stored procedure. But notice I've got the @country code parameter here instead of what was the hard-coded value there. So select country code, the given country code. Again, we want to sum the quote value from our dataset source table, where the country code, so where the geo country code, the column in the table, equals that parameter that we've passed it. So basically, we create that stored procedure, and the way we run it is we use this command here. So you'd have an exec, which is an abbreviation for execute. There's my stored procedure name, and here's the string value that represents the UK, and that's how you'd run that. So I'd actually run this now. Same bit of code. Now notice this time we're saving the results into a table. So we're inserting into our sum values table the results of the SQL from our select statement. So when I ran that stored procedure, it basically just said one row's return. That's because it's actually put the values, as you suspect, into this sum value. So if I run that, we have one row of data. That's the same output. So there's the country code GBR, there's the quote value. So what we're going to do now is we're going to jump into Data Factory, and we're actually going to turn that into a pipeline rather than having to use a SQL Server SSMS toolset each time we want to run that stored procedure. Again, just to reiterate the point, there could be many stored procedures and there could be lots of other tasks in there as well. So this is our Data Factory. Just to show you, so here is my Azure subscription. I've selected my Data Factory service from my dashboard, which is shown here. That then puts me onto this tab. You then select the author and monitor here, which will put me through to this. This is the landing page for Data Factory. You'll find description this and some of the other videos as related Data Factory videos in the Aztec channel. If you just take a look at that. We actually want to create it, which is this author here. And that puts us through to the authoring part of Data Factory. And then as you can see here from our four main concepts, here's the pipeline, data sets, connections down here, which translates to your linked services. So what we're going to actually do is create a new pipeline. So we want to add a pipeline. And what that does, it brings up this pipeline blade here. There's no activities in the pipeline, obviously, so we've got a blank canvas here currently. But notice we've got this sub part of the screen here, which is contextually sensitive to what we have selected here. So I select the pipeline itself, and it's basically saying, what do you want to call it? So I'll just call it demo pipe for speed, and I'll spell that wrong, so let's call it demo pipe even. And there's our name. Like, there's reasons you can pass parameters into these things, and obviously the more detail we get, you can use more and more of these sections, these tabs. But we're keeping this very simple, so we're just going to call the pipeline demo pipeline. And again, for a pipeline, there's a whole number. Remember, I mentioned you can have many activity tasks. So give you an idea: move and transforming copy data, flow. You'll find a description of flow in another video. There's a whole set of activities that we can add into a pipeline here, and just work your way through those and get familiar with the Data Factory add pipeline canvas. In this case, we're actually going to call a SQL Server store procedure. We drag it, it's all graphical, drag it to the canvas, and there is an activity. This is an activity. Notice this part of the screen has changed, so these are the settings and associated tabs for those settings that are relevant to a stored procedure activity, which sits on our pipeline canvas here. So back to store procedure, and as you can see, we'll just call it a generic name, so I'll call it USP basic, no reason for that. SQL account. What SQL Server can I find my stored procedure in as part of this activity? So you can create a new one. And as you can see here, it's a stored procedure. So stored procedures are supported in Warehouse, SQL Database, SQL Managed Instance, on-premise SQL Server, Data Factory, as per the other videos, can come through to on-premise as well. I've actually already got one created for speed, which will show in this list box. So this is my data set. So Azure SQL Database 1. So basically this is going to be the linked service. So I'm going to connect that. We can test that. I know it already works. So we've got a linked service. We've got a connection through to an Azure SQL database. This is the store procedure activity. So we now need to give it the store procedure name to run. So we've already got the linked service connection. So we'll look inside the SQL and say, these are the store procedures. I'm going to jump back to SQL Server just to show you that. So here we are back inside our SQL Server. Here's the store procedures, and there are the 3 store procedures there, just to show you that the factory has actually queried that linked service. Jumping back to factory, the store procedure we created is USP insert some values. Now again, there's no parameter here, so we basically say import the parameter. So it'll look at the store procedure and it'll say, as you can see here, country code, there's one parameter that it's actually got. Again, for speed as part of this demo, I'll just add in the hard-coded value. Obviously, we could parameterize that if we're going to use this for different countries, or it's a one activity in a number of activities as part of that pipeline. So basically, that's it. So we're calling that store procedure, and the country code, we're going to pass it this value of GBR. That's all we need to do. So Data Factory runs as a service. So any pipelines or changes to pipelines, you have to publish into that service. So as you can see here, it says publish all, and there's one thing I need to publish. So I will select that, and we're going to publish this new pipeline into the Azure Data Factory service, which it's actually done there. So it's completed successfully. So we've now got a pipeline. So as you can see here, back over here, pipelines, demo pipe now exists and available. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to run that. And as you can see here, it's given us 2 options, a trigger now, which we'll actually use momentarily, but we can actually create or edit a new trigger. And basically, a pipeline, there's a couple of ways you can actually do this. So I want to add a new one in. Just to show you this, so we can have a schedule which is similar to Control M or SQL Server, SQL Agent. You can actually schedule a task. You can have a tumbling one, which is a similar idea, but it basically means the task repeats on a regular cycle, let's say every once hour, once every 15 minutes, whatever it is. Or you can also have an event. So an event is basically something that happens. So in this case, if you've got blob storage, 2 events which basically are supported there are a file creation and a file delete. So you can basically create, as you'll find inside Aztec, there's a video around a pipeline which has actually got an event trigger in that. So when a file lands, the pipeline activity starts. But so that's outside the context of this video. So all we're actually going to do is we're going to trigger now. So we're going to run our pipeline now. So that then starts to run here. So it's running demo pipe. What we'll do is we'll go and monitor that. Remember, that was one of the things that was available to us. So we'll go and monitor demo pipe, and actually that's ran already. So actually you can see here, so demo pipe status was successful. I triggered it manually and it ran at 5:34. There you go, there's the notification that it's just succeeded. So what we can do is we can actually click on this monitor entry, and it takes us through to our pipeline again. Remember, so it was just a single activity. It's this store procedure. So basically that's what the pipeline looks like. But if you notice down here, we actually have this activity run. So this is our pipeline actually running, and this is the status of it. And we can drill into this using these icons here. So what was the input to the pipeline? The input value was GBR, and it was passed in as a string. And we can actually see what the output. So the output of this is basically it ran a store procedure in SQL Server. So the only output we'll get will be in relation to the execution time. So that ran successfully. So what we'll do now is we'll go back through to SQL Server, and we'll show you how that's ran. So we'll go back to select the values from our sum values table, which, if you remember, is where the store procedure was writing the sum value to. And you'll notice this time around we actually have 2 rows. So we had the first row here from when we ran the store procedure manually ourselves here, but we've now got this second row. Again, bear in mind this is just a demo to show you how we can bring all these different activities together inside a basic pipeline. So we ran the pipeline, it called the store procedure. For that given country code, it totaled the value and it's inserted into the table. Clearly there's no primary key here, which is why we have 2 rows the same. But the point being there, just to show you that we built that pipeline and it did actually run that store procedure and then populate the table for us. So What I'm going to do now is a couple of URLs. So the first one is for Data Factory itself. I'll leave this on the screen for a couple of seconds just for you to get familiar with it. If you go into Google or Bing and just type Azure Data Factory, you'll end up on these URLs anyhow. So that's a great place to get familiar with all the documentation behind Data Factory. And then also what I wanted to call out here is a new feature around templates. So I'll just actually take you back into Data Factory to show you what I'm referring to. So I'm still on the Monitor tab here. So I'll go back to Author here. And you'll notice when we choose pipeline, we've got this template. So we're going to build a new pipeline from template. So this is only added in about February 2019. And basically our product engineering guys thought, how can we make it easier for people, particularly if you're familiar to SIS, how can we make it easier for people to get familiar and au fait with building data factory pipelines? And it came this idea of a template gallery. So this template gallery is going to grow as more templates are added into it. So in the first instance, we have a set of templated um, pipelines where you just add in your various linked services and data sets into the pipeline to basically quickly get you up and running with building pipelines inside a data factory. And if you look through this, there's a lot of common tasks there you might want to move. So I actually wanted to call this out, make you aware of it now. And then the other bit also is I just click through to it then. So actually what I'll do is I'll show you the URL again. So just so you're familiar with that, I've just created a summary value to that. There's the URL to take you through to a great little video from our product group around templates. And then similarly, just returning to this slide here, what we've also got is at Microsoft Learn, we have it's all free. We have a number of labs and tutorials for you to sit down and you basically follow the labs. It's all hands-on to get you familiar with Data Factory, building pipelines, activities, all the things we've just talked about in this video. And I've called out two in particular here: data ingestion with Azure Data Factory and uploading data to a data lake and using Data Factory to do that. Hopefully you'll find both of those useful. And just as a closing point here, there's another associated video down in Aztec Azure Technology channel. And again, going to be building a very basic pipeline, but this time we're going to be doing it with something called Flow. So look out for that video. I hope you found this video in particular useful and interesting, and hopefully you'll make use of the other videos in the channel. Thanks for your time, and bye-bye for now.